Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today. And the subject of the video today is going to be on Jalen Ramsey and specifically teams that I think should consider trading for him. Uh, as a little bit of background before I get into the teams that I have picked out here, Jalen Ramsey is a cornerback for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And after they lost this last week to the Texans in week 2, he requested a trade from the team because he was sick and tired of being there and he wanted a fresh start, and he was frustrated because the Jaguars haven't given him a contract extension yet, and he's sick of their losing nature because they were 0-2 at the time. As of now, they are 1-2 because on Thursday Night Football they beat the Titans, but I believe that what he feels is still unchanged. He still wants a trade, and because of that, I scoured the teams in the NFL and tried to find some teams where I think that he would be a good fit, or teams that should just in general pursue him in a trade. I should clarify, I'm going to eliminate a lot of teams right off the bat. I basically didn't put any teams on this list who I think aren't contenders because I don't think that those types of teams would look to trade for a guy like him. Which he's a guy where when you're acquiring him, you're looking to contend right away, I feel like, because he's right in the heart of his prime. You're not going to really acquire a guy who's like 26 to be on a rebuilding team, I don't think. He also wants a really big contract extension, which I think if you're a bad team or a team looking to start a rebuild, you're not really going to be looking to acquire a guy who wants a huge contract extension right away necessarily. So with that out of the way, I think we can eliminate a lot of teams right off the bat. Like any team within the Jaguars division, so like the Titans, the Texans, and the Colts, I don't think any of them would be a contention because I don't think the Jaguars would trade him there. I also took out teams that I think have a really good secondary already because I don't think that they would see a need to trade for Jalen Ramsey because that would just be um, like an area on their team that they don't really need to improve. So right there, I'm going to take out teams like the Patriots and the Ravens, who I think already have some of the best secondaries in the NFL, along with the Chicago Bears, who already have or excuse me, not Prince Amukamara. Oh, I think they do have Prince Amukamara, but they have him. They've got Kyle Fuller. They've got Eddie Jackson. They've got Ha Clinton Dix. So that secondary doesn't really need that much help. So that's a team that I'm taking out. Um, and then, as I say, I'm not putting in teams that are rebuilding, so that basically takes out the Jets, the Dolphins. I think the Bills, despite them maybe having an okay season this year, I think that they're still kind of like a rebuilding team with a really young quarterback. I'm taking them out. I'm taking the Bengals out because they're bad. As I said previously, the Ravens I'm taking out because they have a really good secondary. The Steelers because they're kind of in a not a rebuilding season this year, but they've already kind of punted on the season because Ben Roethlisberger's out. I think the Browns have way too much salary cap invested in other players to give Jalen Ramsey a big contract, so they're out. And then other teams, I think the Chargers have too much money invested elsewhere, and then they also have a pretty good secondary already. The Broncos don't really need help in the secondary, and the list goes on and on. But what I'm trying to get to in identifying all these teams is that like it's not like you have 31 teams that are going to be trading for Jalen Ramsey. I think realistically, I could see like 10 teams trading for him. Today, I've identified 6 teams that I think would be the best fits for him. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. The first team I have on here is the Kansas City Chiefs. They're a team that they're really good. They're really well rounded for the most part. On offense, they really have no weakness. On defense, they have like a great front seven, I'd say. But the area that I think that they could really use help is cornerback. They have a good safety in Tyrann Mathieu, but their corners just aren't that spectacular. You got Brashad Breeland and Kendall Fuller. Those are like your starters right there. Neither guy really inspires much confidence in me. Like Brashad Breeland is a good second or third defensive back, but not a primary defensive back. And so I think from that perspective, they could really use Jalen Ramsey. And they also have some wiggle room with contracts because a lot of their dudes like Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and them are still like on rookie contracts. So they still have some wiggle room with contracts to pick up a guy like Jalen Ramsey. And I think he would immediately bolster that defensive backfield, and he would just be a really good player to add to round out this team. The next team I have on here is a team very similar to the Chiefs situation, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, I'll repeat some of the same things, but it's all true. They have a very well-rounded team on offense for sure. Quarterback, they're set. Running backs, they don't have like one guy, but they have a pretty good committee between Jordan Howard, Darren Sproles, and Corey Clement. Wide receivers, they're pretty stacked with Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, and Nelson Aguilar. Tight ends, they got Zach Ertz, so they're covered. A really good offensive line, and their front seven on defense is really solid, especially with like defensive stars like Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, and Timmy Jernigan on the line. And then you got good linebackers in Nigel Bradham and Zach Brown. But again, to me, the area on this whole team that might be a weakness is cornerback. They have some decent safeties because they've got Malcolm Jenkins, they've got Andrews and Deho, and they've got Roddy McLeod. But and Jonathan Cypern actually is another safety that they've got. But at corner, you've got Ronald Darby and Sidney Jones, and those guys to me are maybe like your third and fourth corners on a good defensive backfield. So I think from that perspective, they could really benefit from a Jalen Ramsey. You still do have some salary cap room to work with as well, so they could acquire him. And maybe they don't sign him to the extension, but I think even just for this season, he could be a good pickup for this team, just to bolster their team for 1 year even. But yeah, he would definitely bolster a defensive backfield where that's really the only weakness. Next, I have a division rival of the Eagles, which is the Dallas Cowboys, who I feel like are kind of going all in this year. And again, similar situation to these other two teams. They have a really well-rounded team except for defensive backs. At quarterback, they got Dak. He's basically their guy. Running back, Zeke, enough said. Wide receivers, they got a plethora between Amari Cooper, Randall Cobb, and Michael Gallup, so they're set. Tight end, you got Jason Witten. Really good offensive line and a really good defensive line and stellar linebackers. At linebacker, you got Sean Lee, Jalen Smith, and Leighton Vander Esch, probably the best linebacking core in the NFL. And then up front, you got Demarcus Lawrence, who's really good. Malik Collins at defensive tackle and Tyrone Crawford, all really good playmakers. And Robert Quinn, who's kind of a quiet addition for them. But defensive backs and even safeties, you don't have that much going for you on this team. You got at D back, you got Anthony Brown, Awazi, I think is how you say his name. You got Byron Jones and Jordan Lewis. None of those guys really. I think you could say Anthony Brown and Byron Jones are maybe like your second and third best corners on a decent defensive backfield. But I think adding a Jalen Ramsey would put this defense in the next stratosphere because they'd have elite players at every level of the defense between the line, the linebackers, and then the secondary. You would just have studs at every line, and you basically wouldn't be able to throw to your best wide receiver very often with Jalen Ramsey on them, so it would force the hands of a lot of defenses to change up what they're going to do instead of being able to right now kind of take advantage over the air versus this defense, which I feel like is something that some defenses are taking advantage of or could potentially take advantage of in the future because this defense is stellar against the run game. But yeah, I think that's one area where they could definitely stand to improve is talent in the secondary, and Jalen Ramsey would definitely bring that. The next team on here, I'd say, is the first one to kind of deviate from the others. They're definitely not a team that's like complete and all around, and they just need help in the secondary. It's actually very different from that. It's the 49ers I have on here. I wouldn't to normally put them on here, but because they're off to a 2-0 start, I feel like people, including the team itself, kind of feel like they're contenders now. You're pretty set at quarterback with Garoppolo. Running back, you've got the best running back core in the league between Tevin Coleman and Matt Breida and Mostert, I think is how you say his name. Wide receivers, you're all right. Tight end, you're set with George Kittle. Offensive line's okay, but specifically looking at the defense, the defensive line's pretty good between Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, and DeForest Buckner and D. Jones. Linebackers are okay, led by Kawan Alexander, and your secondary is actually really good on this team between Richard Sherman, Jason Verrett, Jimmy Ward, and Jaquiski Tart. That's one of their safeties. That's a pretty good secondary as is, but I actually think Jalen Ramsey could vault this secondary into like the unquestionable best in the NFL. I feel like right now it's in the conversation of like a top 5 secondary in the NFL, but if you can make Richard Sherman only your second defensive back and make Jalen Ramsey your number one, this defensive backfield would be insane, especially with Jason Verrett as maybe like a slot defensive back. They would be relatively unstoppable, I think, through the air. As far as defensive backfields and secondaries go, I think that they would be looking really solid. And they're definitely a team where I said, I don't think a team should trade for an area they're already strong in. But I think this is a team that's still kind of looking for an identity. They've got a decent offense, they've got a decent defense, but I feel like this could be like the second coming of the Legion of Boom with Richard Sherman on the 49ers instead of the Seahawks now. Next, I have to speak of the devil, I have the Seahawks on here. Again, another team that's kind of like the 49ers. I feel like they have some established good players, but I feel like they are still looking for a little bit more of um, an identity. And I feel like Jalen Ramsey coming to this team could give them that, or at least round out a defense that has the makings of a decent defense, but I don't think it's all the way there yet. And let me address that right here. So defensive linemen, you're pretty set with Jadeveon Clowney and Ziggy Ansah, and then you've got a good. Um, they had I think, a good defensive tackle in Quentin Jefferson. He's pretty decent. Linebackers, you're all right between Michael Kendrick, Shaquem Griffin, and Bobby Wagner's a stud. He's probably the best middle linebacker in the game. And then KJ Wright is a really good player as well. So really good linebackers, decent defensive line. But defensive backs are relatively weak, I'd say. They've got Shaquille Griffin and Trey Flowers, who I think on a good defense, those are arguably even like your third and fourth defensive backs. And so for that reason, I think that Jalen Ramsey would be a really good addition in that he would make this secondary a lot more dangerous because I think right now it's kind of the weakness of this defense. They're really good in their front seven, but their secondary is somewhat weak. And so I think acquiring him would really round out this secondary well. The sixth and final team I have on here that should consider acquiring Jalen Ramsey is the Green Bay Packers. Again, a defense that looks pretty strong to start here. They've got good guys on the line. Kenny Clark is kind of like the stud on that defensive line. Linebackers, they're pretty good between Blake Martinez, Preston Smith, and Zadarius Smith. But the secondary, they acquired Adrian Amos, which I think was a really good addition. And their defensive backs consist of Jair Alexander, Tramon Williams, and Kevin King. Jair Alexander is definitely starter worthy, but I'm not completely sold on Kevin King or a very old out of his prime Tramon Williams. And I feel like acquiring Jalen Ramsey would really bolster this secondary tremendously. Because I feel like Jair Alexander is more of like the second best. He should be the second best corner on a good defense rather than the primary one, I think. And so I think that Jalen Ramsey would really help this team. And I want to clarify now that I've come to the end here. I think Jalen Ramsey would basically help every team, but I think not every team would be in a situation to acquire him, and so that's why I only had 6 teams here today. If you have any comments or thoughts on what I posted, please feel free to leave them below. And if you think that there's a team I left out who definitely would be looking to acquire him, please mention them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. Hope you have a good day. See you next time. Bye.